This session is I Know Your Filtering Policy Better Than You Do, External Enumeration and Exploitation of Email and Web Security Solutions, and your speaker is Ben Williams.
Good morning. We've got video there. HDMI 3? Sorry? Number one. There we go, that's better. Well, welcome. It's Vegas and it's 9 a.m., so you've done well to get here. I know some of you probably got jet lag, so you're probably up since 4 a.m. if you've traveled from Europe like I have. And some of you may even have been up all night, but well done in either case. So my name is Ben Williams. I'm a penetration tester, and I work for an NCC group in the UK. So I'm going to talk to you today about, well, it's in the class of auditing, but you could say it could either be done offensively or defensively. So it fits into kind of both categories. So my day-to-day job as a penetration tester is trying to gain unauthorized access to internal networks, external networks, web applications, that kind of thing. So I'm very much thinking in the attacker mindset. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about some of the talks I've given previously, and then I'm going to do a section on enumerating web filtering solutions, and then I'm going to talk about enumerating email filtering solutions, and as I go, I'll talk about bypassing these solutions and give a little bit of summary at the end. I've spoken previously for Black Hat Europe a couple of times on hacking appliances. So finding vulnerabilities in web security and email security, appliances, firewalls, remote access gateways, that kind of stuff. But this talk is a little bit different, because previously I've talked about vulnerabilities in the product themselves, which meant an attacker could take control of those security solutions. And I've demonstrated getting root shell on various different appliances in these previous talks. Within those couple of talks, I talked about vulnerabilities in products from about 12 different vendors. So those were attacks against the products themselves to take control of them. This presentation is a little bit different because I'm talking about enumerating the policies and products from the outside and using that to bypass the policies which are in place. So previously I've shown kind of high severity issues. So today I'm going to be talking about low severity issues. So let's hear it for the low severity issues. Well, why are these really interesting? They're interesting to me because low severity issues, nobody really wants to take ownership of fixing those. You know, they're at the bottom of the list. But they can be generic, so they can span a lot of different products, and they can be persistent, because they last a long time, because nobody wants to fix them. And most of the issues that I'm going to be talking about today are exploiting, well, not even exploiting, because I'm not going to show you any exploits. It feels weird to be standing up here, like, not showing you any exploits. I'm going to show you a few little tricks, but there's no SQL injection, no cross-site scripting, no command injection, no same origin policy bypass. So none of the stuff that I've talked about in previous presentations. We're just going to be using functionality which is there by design. So here's a typical simplified network diagram. And the products I'm going to be talking about today are the email and web filtering solutions, which kind of sit in the DMZ here. So for the web filtering solution, this basically proxies requests from the internal network. They go out around here and then proxy it out to resources on the internet. Right? But there's no external facing services on this box. You shouldn't be able to tell what solution this is from the outside. Right? You with me? Email filtering, typically you're going to have port 25 open so you can receive inbound email. And you shouldn't really have too many other services open to the outside from this, but you may in fact have a managed service in between So messages aren't actually delivered direct, in which case you wouldn't be able to talk to this bot directly anyway. So these products, typically, some of the vulnerabilities I've found in some of these products, I wouldn't be able to find in an external infrastructure test because I can't see what I need to see in order to work out that I've got a vulnerable version. So that kind of initiated my interest in trying to find these products. So the techniques I'm going to talk about today are kind of specialist vulnerability scanners, because if you were to scan these IPs from the outside with Nessus or Nexpose or Nmap or OpenVAS or whatever you use, you wouldn't be able to enumerate that these are unpatched. So I want to be able to find hidden vulnerable products. And when I started investigating these techniques, I quickly realized actually you can use the same techniques for enumerating the policies which are in place on these products. So you could use that in advance of, as an attacker, in advance of a phishing or client-side attack to greatly improve the effectiveness of the attack. Or as a defender, you could use it for auditing purposes, to audit your policy. And I'm talking about the effective policy rather than the one you think you've configured. Because very often in these products, the UIs can be a bit confusing. You're not quite sure exactly what you have configured until you test it for real. And also, I've used the tools and techniques to do kind of more of a capability analysis of some of the products. What can they do, especially in terms of deep content analysis? Can products find an executable embedded in a Word document? Can they find a script embedded in a zip file, in a PowerPoint presentation, for example? So the tools I'm going to be talking about are new tools, and we're going to be releasing these, probably release WebFeet this week and MailFeet next week. So going to be doing some tweets when I do that. I've used them in a detailed analysis as part of customer engagements with some of our clients. I've been doing some specific product testing in a test environment, and I've also been using some of the techniques to do a kind of survey of a wide variety of domains. And some of the stats I'm going to show you today, I've been sending some emails to the Fortune 500 to kind of understand what products they use and some of the policies that they implement. So the first tool we're going to talk about is WebFeet. So this needs a small amount of user interaction, just getting a single internal employee to click on a link and view a web application. And it works by having some JavaScript on the front end, running in the browser, and some files and a little bit of PHP on the back end. But it's a very simple application. And you can use this for audits or reconnaissance in kind of social engineering client-side attack situations. So let me talk about a very simple enumeration technique. So you've got WebFeet sitting on an IP on the internet. It's an attacker's web application. And it runs some client-side JavaScript. So a very simple thing it can do is basically, this is requesting files. Yeah? So you can basically download a series of files, but it's not downloading, it's simulating the downloading because it's making requests from XML HTTP requests. So there's no save as dialog popping up in the user's browser that the user might not be aware at all. So it's very transparent. So the first thing I did with implementing this is to just request a simple file. And one of the things that web proxies do is they modify the HTTP headers in the response. So file gets requested, file is downloaded, headers are modified from the headers which would have been in the original response. So this would be the headers of the original response from the web server, from the attacker's web server. And if it's going through a proxy, you tend to get additional headers. So here you can see a couple of cache headers added, and you can see a host name. So this is an internal host name of the web security proxy. And here you've got a host name, and this is the proxy port. But you tend to get a lot more information. So I'll show you some of that in a minute. But basically, because this is all within my web application, I can pass that information back. And the interesting headers in terms of this type of enumeration, especially the VIA header, but also caching headers and some other custom X headers, So here's some examples of those which I've collected in a drive-by way. So I ran a simple test for a few weeks, and I got hundreds of headers. So here you can see you've got, at the top we've got some cache headers. Here a host name is disclosed. Some of these I've obfuscated because obviously I'm collecting this in a kind of without permission way. So you've got the proxy port. Here you've got an internal IP address, so that would disclose the IP address ranges in the DMZ. Here you can see we've got in the VIA headers, McAfee Web Gateways giving the exact product version that's deployed. Similarly, this is a Barracuda, so sometimes in the host name it tells you what the product is because the administrator has set it up that way. This is a clear indicator of a Barracuda product version. Cisco ARM port, you've got a full product version there. And then you've got things like Squid proxies, so a lot of the web security products are built on top of Squid proxy. But if you know what the vendor is and you know what the version of Squid is, you can work out the version of the product that's in use. And sometimes you get multiple headers, so where you've got proxies chained together, perhaps you've got a caching proxy and a web security proxy chained together, you actually get multiple headers added on. So here, so you can see there's two headers there. And sometimes you get custom X headers, so this is a Web Marshal product, so I can see that. So I can see this as an external attacker, what products and versions are in use. So the second thing I implemented was to do a kind of download of lots of different files to enumerate the filtering policies that's in place. What I didn't realize when I started implementing this is that this gives a much better way of enumerating the products in use. So the way this works is basically the JavaScript on the client side is requesting a whole series of files. So you could have icar in a zip, executable in a Word document, all the test cases you want to do. So what happens when a file gets blocked? You get a block page, right? So either the request is blocked at the request. So, for example, if a site is in a category that's being blocked in a category filter, it would block the request. But more commonly, responses are blocked, especially where you're doing deep content analysis of the file, what's actually in the file. So, for example, if a request results in a malicious file download, then the response is blocked. Now, when things are filtered, that response is then replaced by a policy block page. And the block page serves three purposes. It blocks the threat, it informs the user that the page has been blocked, and it prevents the browser from timing out. So this is a really important feature. So normally, the response is basically some HTML with a block page. Sometimes, a small number of cases, about 10%, I think, it's actually a redirect to a web page on the web proxy or some other internal web server. That's a much smaller number of cases. So here's an example of a web proxy block page. This is from a Cisco ARM port web security appliance. And you see I've obfuscated some of the information there. So you had the original URL here, which has been blocked. And you see you've got a username and a domain name, internal IP address, and the URL again. And at the bottom, it says what the policy was, why it's been blocked. And the reason I've obfuscated it is because this is not my proxy. This is one block page I've collected in a drive-by way. So who here is responsible for a web security proxy or the policy on? So did you imagine that your block pages would be externally accessible to attackers? Anybody think that was the case? There's a fundamental problem with these block pages. So, and the problem is that this is my JavaScript, this is my back-end web application. This is all within the same domain. From a web application's same origin policy perspective, this block page is a modified response within my web application. So this block page belongs to me, so I just capture it in the JavaScript and pass it back for troubleshooting purposes. So I've collected quite a lot of these. So sometimes you get quite a lot of disclosure. So this is similar to the web security proxy. So I'm going to show you a whole series of these different block pages. I don't expect you to take in what's on every single one of them, but I want to give you an idea that this problem is generic and it affects lots of different products. So here we've got, it's telling you the internal IP address, the username, the domain name, and you see actually here there's some functionality, which again, this functionality is within the same domain as the attacking application. So I could actually leverage some of this functionality. But I'm not talking about exploitation, I'm just talking about low severity information disclosure issues today, right? So here's another one. This is a blue coat, a proxy AV. So here, sometimes you get lots of disclosure about the version number. So you can see Sophos is being used, and you get pattern version, engine version, that kind of stuff. This one's from a Fortinet. Not a lot of disclosure there. This one's from a Sonic Wall. This is Zscaler. This one's a McAfee product. This one's Squid Clam AV. So you can see getting loads of these. They've got wide diversity. They've got dozens of these things in a short period of a couple of weeks on a low traffic site. This is a trend. So this is quite interesting. So this is ICAR. I'm using ICAR to trigger these block pages, and it's telling me it's a dangerous disease vector, which I thought was kind of amusing. This one is a checkpoint block page. So sometimes it doesn't give you the product quite obviously, but if you just Google some of this standard text here, you'll quickly find out what product is in use. And here, sometimes you have to look in the HTML. You see here, this is a WebSense product. Here are two different blue coat block pages from different versions, but you can see that this one is telling you it's a blue coat, this one doesn't. But if you look at the text, it's kind of standard format. And you probably can't see this, but this one's using a Sophos plugin, and this one's using the Kaspersky plugin. So you can enumerate the plugins that are used with these products as well. And it's a Trend Micro one. So that's collecting block pages from web security proxies as an external attacker. It'll tell me what product is in use. But as a side effect of this, I started getting these, which I couldn't work out what they were to begin with. This is a desktop antivirus plugin block page. Yeah? And here's another one. There's a Trend product. There's a Kaspersky product. We've got dozens of different versions of these kind of things. And here's a Sophos one. So because the antivirus browser plugin works in the same way, it's replacing the response with a threat, with a block page, I can collect those. And it took me a while to get my head around this because it seems odd. So let me give you an example of a web feed report. So as I said, the reason that we're enumerating the block pages is we're actually blocking threats. So the way the application works is that it does all these tests and then it uploads a report to the back-end web server. And you see here's one of the example reports that I've pulled back over the last few weeks. And I've obfuscated who the organization was, and I've taken some of the detail out there. But this is the part of the application which is doing some of the file download enumeration. And you can see here, although it's green, that means I've actually collected a block page. So the threat was blocked, but I've collected some information. So you can see ICAR, in this case, is generating a block page. A standard Windows XE generating a block page. File with profanity, not blocked. So red is bad, obviously. Unlocked breakout shell, block page. So some of these threats are being blocked. VB script, batch file on its own, not being blocked. And then a wide variety of files by file extension, not being blocked. Here's an XE by file extension, not being blocked, is being blocked. And then we've got custom XE being blocked. XE renamed to text, not blocked. XE renamed to document, not blocked. And you can see you can have a wide variety of these tests. And this report was generated in about 3 seconds. So it just downloads, well, it's not even a series, it downloads them in parallel because it basically using jQuery to request all the files at the same time. So you've got scripts in documents, password-protected documents, etc., and then towards the bottom, URL category enumeration, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So it's all collected in a drive-by way. So, as I said, I've been recently developing this tool, and I've produced some statistics, but this is only statistics on 14 organizations. So, ideally, this could do with some further study to do it for more organizations. With the email filtering, I've done it on a larger number of organizations. So this is from 14 organizations, and it's 15 different file download types. So first, a file which is no threat, which is just a piece of HTML, is downloaded 100% of the time. So the higher the graph is, the higher the bar is, the more times it's been downloaded. Here we can see profanity, blocked once. iCar, blocked 100% of the time when it's on its own. When it's in a zip file, it's downloaded once. Here we've got a Windows breakout. So these are two hacking tools, a Windows breakout exe and a password dumping tool. I think the difference between these is that the first one is a signed executable, which I think is why it's been downloaded more. Here we've got password-protected documents and archives. So you've got password-protected Word and password-protected Excel, downloaded 100% of the time. Password-protected zip file, downloaded 80% of the time. Here we've got just raw VBS and batch files, downloaded 70% of the time. Now, if you're using these in a real attack, you would embed these in something else, because the browser typically has functionality to do a pop-up warning to users. So you'd stick them in a zip file or a document of some kind. And then we've got executables and scripts embedded in different versions of Word. So in Word 2003 and Word 2010. And with those, you're getting a download rate of between 80 and 90%. So there is a difference in some of these threats in terms of some of this ability to download these threats is due to lack of product capability, and some is due to company policy. So these ones are different. These are password-protected Excel, Word, and zips. So these are allowed by company policy, or the policy is configured, because most web security proxies I've looked at have got a capability of blocking these encrypted attachments or encrypted files. Whereas some of the other issues, finding an executable inside, or embedded within a document or an archive, is more technically challenging. So these issues are more to do with product capability, whereas these are to do with what the company is allowing. So let's talk about SSL inspection, HTTPS inspection. So there is the potential to do inspection of SSL or HTTPS traffic, but lots of companies don't do it, and mainly not for technical reasons, because it's technically possible to do this, but they don't do it because of legal issues, contractual issues. They don't want to be interfering with employees' privacy, inspecting their banking traffic, for example. So very briefly, the way that SSL inspection usually works is that you have, the proxy has a CA, and it's creating certificates for the sites which are being visited. All of the browsers internally are configured to trust that CA, so you can have these two levels of encryption. You have the normal encryption to the sites on the internet, and then you have this kind of, it's a real encryption, but it's kind of spoofed internally, which means that on the proxy, you've got plain text traffic. So you can look for malware, and you can look for executable code, because it's in plain text on the web security proxy. So if you were to check for this with WebFeet, you just run the same set of tests over HTTP and HTTPS, and you can see whether or not the policy is applied to both. So here, this is a site where SSL inspection is not being done. So over HTTP, they've got a reasonable policy. They're blocking a few things. Over HTTPS, they're not blocking anything. So it's quite obvious they're not doing SSL inspection. There's another side effect of SSL inspection, in that sometimes it causes some strange things going on with the certificates, because effectively the proxy is replacing the certificates of the original site. So if the original site certificate was invalid, the proxy, if it's not blocking those sites with invalid certificates, it's replacing those certificates with a valid certificate. So it's making external websites' invalid certificates valid. So you can do some enumeration of that by trying to load images here from a site which has deliberately got an invalid certificate. If these images load, normally these images should generate an error in the browser. If these load mysteriously, that means that something has happened with SSL, which suggests that the certificate's been replaced. Similarly, you can enumerate the URL category filtering which is in place, because you can load these images from lots of different sites. So in the proof of concept I've done, I'm loading images from lots of different sites in different categories. So these will load within the HTML, and then you can do on error or on load JavaScript statements in the HTML to update the DOM. And then the end of the enumeration, the whole DOM is passed back to the attacker's web server. So here's an example of that. So you see we've got porn sites, drug sites, gambling, hacking, etc., etc. So typically, organizations will want to block some of these, right? And the way that I've done this is basically, you see these images. These are using favicons. And the reason I've used those is because they're small images. They're in fairly predictable locations on the web servers, and they don't change very often. So, if these load, basically it updates the DOM. And then at the end of the enumeration, the whole DOM is passed back. So, for web filtering, within a few seconds, I know what products you're using, sometimes with the exact versions. I know what policy you've got for a wide variety of file downloads. I know whether you're able to detect threats in HTTPS or not, usually not, and how effective your URL filtering is and what categories you're filtering. So no exploits required, right? Just a few little tricks. So let's talk about email. So I'll talk about email second because it's a little bit more complex, because the topologies are more complex, the policies are more complex, and you have sometimes multiple layers and different outcomes. So similar principles, but it works in a different way. Basically, you have a tool which is sending a whole bunch of emails, a whole series of emails with different attachments added on. And a listener, which is basically listening for responses. And the simplest way to use this tool is it just sends a whole series of emails to a non-existent user at the target domain. And by default, Domino and Exchange, they all reply when a user doesn't exist with the original message and the original attachments. Right? That's the easiest way to use it. So you basically, you know what you've sent, you know what you're getting back, you kind of cross-check those, and they'll give you a differential of what's been filtered out. So topologies are more complex with email, so you've got various different options. You can use a managed service where you're using a third party, the MX records for the target domain point to this managed service here. Messages are processed to remove bulk spam, bulk phishing, known malware, that kind of stuff, and then forwarded on the rest to the internal mail server. The other option is to have an on-site appliance. Sometimes this is built into the firewall, or sometimes a software solution, but it's usually these days on-site appliances. Doing the same thing. Normally, the appliances have more capability, especially in terms of doing deep content security. So often companies have two layers. So they'll use the managed service to filter out the bulk of spam and malware. And then they'll do more complex policies on the email appliance, which is kind of sitting behind that. And normally the path is it goes through both on the way in, but bypasses the managed service on the way out. That's typically what I tend to see. So I did some statistics on the Fortune 500 in terms of the managed services they're using. This is really easy to do in a scripted way. So you can just do this with DNS. Well, in fact, it's more accurate. So the simplest way is to do it is to do DNS lookups for the MX records of all the target domains you're interested in. And within the domain portion of the host names returned, it'll tell you if it's IronPort or Semantic Message Labs or whatever. It's more accurate to look up the IPs of those MX records and then do a whois on those IPs, because that's slightly more accurate. But you can see, I've done some real-world stats of the Fortune 500, and you can see 45% not using a managed service. And then you can see who the key players are in the market. You've got Semantic Message Labs and Microsoft Outlook, 13%. You've got Google Postini, and you've got Cisco IronPort and Proofpoint. So that's unintrusive because you're doing DNS lookups. To find appliances, typically you need to be more intrusive. So here, I don't expect you to take everything in on this page, but we're just going to look briefly at some SMTP message headers. As I said, the simplest way to enumerate these is to send an email to a non-existent user, you get a message back, and typically it's got two sets of message headers on. It's got the message headers in the attached message from the original message that you sent in, on the inbound path, and on the message you get back, you've got the headers as the message came back out of the organization to me. Right, so the message headers coming to me are at the top, and the original message headers are at the bottom. So if I just read this through briefly, you can see there's lots of low severity information disclosure in these headers. So I've obfuscated some of it because it's to do with the particular company this was from. But I've not obfuscated some of the product and policy disclosure. So here, we're going to retrace the steps of this message. It was processed by the Proofpoint managed service at the bottom here, and you've got all the spam scores and other scores of how the message was processed. Yeah, it's kind of be interesting if you were a spammer to know what spam scores you were getting. And so it's processed by the Proofpoint managed service. And then here I can see it was next processed by an IronPort appliance. I can see the version of AV that's running is Sophos, and some other information about how the message was processed. And then on the way out, back to the top of the message, I can see that it couldn't be delivered to the internal mail server because the user didn't exist, but it was then reprocessed by the IronPort appliance on the way out. So even though the message didn't go to the internal mail server, it still gets processed by both of the levels of the solution, so I can enumerate the policy on those two solutions. So there's some example of the kind of disclosures you get. So sometimes you get like message processing disclosure, sometimes you get exact product versions that are in use, you get internal IP addresses, internal host names, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of little bits of low severity information disclosure. So when looking at the Fortune 500, so as I said, I sent some test messages to the Fortune 500. This is a pie chart showing the acceptance to non-existing recipients. And 58% of Fortune 500 don't accept messages to non-existent recipients, which is good. 31% accept and respond to non-existent recipients. And most of these, they're responding with the original message. So whatever attachment I sent, I get it back. So I can check what I sent, I can extract the attachment, what comes back, and make sure it's the same file. In which case, if that's gone to the internal mail server, I know if I'd been targeting a real user, that would have got to them, right? This slice here, accept but didn't respond, probably because of additional spam filtering. But even with this 58%, so they're not accepting messages to non-existent users, but I can still enumerate policy with these organizations because I can send to accounts which have an autoresponder that do exist, such as people with out of office switched on or some other kind of autoresponder. So the things I can do to find the product versions, I can look at X headers, received headers, sometimes the format of the message body, stuff like that. So this is the Gartner Magic Quadrant of what are the most, well, it's analysis of secure email gateways. So I want to look at this because I wanted to confirm that my results kind of mapped onto this. And at first glance, it might look a bit woolly because you've got ability to execute up that side and you've got completeness of vision across that side. So this is for IT decision makers in terms of choosing what products they want to. But it's actually quite a lot goes into these statistics and the analysis that they publish. And when I check this against the real world, it does map on. So basically, top right-hand corner, you've got the leaders. So you've got Cisco, Proofpoint, Symantec, Microsoft, and McAfee. So I disregarded Symantec because I was looking predominantly at appliances, because that's my particular interest. But here are my results from the 152 domains of the Fortune 500, which were responding to non-existent recipients. And you see I've got Cisco, Ironport, Proofpoint, Symantec, McAfee. So it does map on. And then you've got a wide variety of other vendors. There's a lot of vendors in the market of doing email filtering. So I can combine the managed services with the products that I found and see how many are using one solution or another or both. So you've got 47% are using just a managed service, 33% are using just appliance or software product, and 20% which were using both. I suspect this is slightly bigger and would eat into this 47% because there may be some appliances that I've missed. Next thing I did was some enumeration of policy. I didn't want to send too many messages, but I sent, so I'm sending messages, I was sending messages to non-existent recipients and sending, I sent 4 tests. A simple text message with no threat, an executable embedded in a Word document, password-protected Excel spreadsheet, and a VBS script embedded in an older style Word document. And the exe and the script basically just did a hello world pop-up. It's just a proof of concept that executable code is getting in. And the 2 main outcomes are this. Either the message goes all the way through, gets an internal mail server, user doesn't exist, I get a bounce, or message gets filtered, I get no response. So between those, that was the majority of cases I can tell, is my message getting filtered or not? But then there were a wide variety of other types of responses, which meant I had to do some additional checking of the responses, because I was getting responses which were telling me the message was blocked, or which were telling me other things. So sometimes you get responses to the sender telling the message has been quarantined or blocked. So for example, in this case, message goes in, gets blocked at a layer, and I get a response here, a response intended for the sender to tell them that their message has been blocked. Like this, for example. So there's some disclosure here. What is this saying? This is saying, basically, your message has been blocked because it was considered a threat. If you put it in a password-protected zip file, it gets delivered. Hooray! Woohoo! Now, I don't need to see this message to work this out, because I can work this out, right? Another case which is kind of interesting edge case is where you get a message coming in, it gets modified, my threat being removed. But because I'm sending to a non-existent recipient, that modified message gets bounced by the internal mail server, and then I get a bounce coming back, like this. So this message originally had an executable in a Word document, and when it comes back, it's got a different attachment, in this case a piece of HTML, which has replaced the original attachment. So this means the policy was effective, but because this was sent to a non-existent user, it's coming back to me. So I'm seeing this, which was intended for the user. And in this, so that was McAfee, in this case, Symantec, doing the same sort of thing, but replacing it with a text file. So although most of the responses are either I'm getting my message back or it's filtered so I get no response, you get these edge cases that you need to differentiate. So sometimes you have to look at, check some in the original attachment, see if you get that back. You need to look at the number of message headers, the structure of the message, etc. So doing the analysis on the message I sent to 152 domains of the Fortune 500, these are the results for those 4 different test cases. Message with no threat is not delivered 100% of the time. And if you look at this one, password-protected Excel spreadsheet, you'll notice it's slightly higher. And to begin with, I couldn't work out what this was. And the answer is that some of these messages, although they were accepted, they were blocked as spam, and having a Word document on a message slightly lowers the spam score. Right? So by having a password-protected Excel spreadsheet on there, you're increasing your delivery rate. But obviously there could be macros in this, there could be executables embedded in it, so there's potentially threats there. So for the executable in the Word document, I was getting a 60% delivery rate, and VBS in an older style Word document getting slightly higher delivery rate, 75%. So these are slightly lower delivery rates than for web, because typically email filtering is a bit better than web filtering tends to be. Well, that's what I'm seeing anyway. So there we go. So I'll show you an example report from MailFeet. So whole series, so basically here's a series of different tests that we're doing. Executable, filtered, so when I get no reply, that is implying it's been filtered. So you can see, this is actually Mail Marshal, this particular one. Executable embedded in, so executable renamed is blocked, encrypted object not blocked. Executable and scripts embedded in various different Word documents were blocked, so that's good. So it's doing deep content analysis. But you see, because of company policy, they're needing to allow password-protected documents and archives because finance and sales, part of their business process, they need to be able to send and receive encrypted Excel spreadsheets, etc. So this is a common problem, and it's a systemic problem. And like you say, I'm definitely getting my attachment back because I checked on my attachment, so I can see I'm getting the same thing back. So here's an example of a document that I've used as part of a client-side attack for a financial institution. I'd previously done a phishing attack and I basically set up a fake portal, got them to try and log in, collected their passwords, but then I started getting responses treating me, the external attacker, as the support person. I can't log in, I'm getting this error message, and I'm supplying them with the answer. I'm solving their problem. So this is basically an executable embedded in a Word document, which hides the executable from the email filtering solution. But this was Metasploit reverse interpreter over HTTPS. And I'd encoded it with the veil evasion framework so that it was hiding that from malware detection. And putting it in a Word document hides it from the fact that there's executable code there. So basically got shell with that on an internal system, which they were concerned about, as you can imagine. So for email filtering, I know what products you're using. I know what your policy is for a wide variety of file attachments. The enumeration takes a bit longer because one of the problems you get with email is that you've got to overcome the anti-spam technologies are there. So you need to overcome tar pitting and grey listing. So you need to send your messages slower. And you need to start with an IP address which has got at least a neutral reputation. So typically it takes between 5 minutes and an hour to do this series of tests. But if you send it to non-existent recipients, it's pretty transparent. And because organizations get a large volumes of spam all the time, administrators aren't going to really notice this kind of enumeration. So, which attacks work? HTTPS for the win. Yeah, because most organizations are not filtering HTTPS traffic. Hidden payloads, which are exercising deep content analysis. So things like executables and scripts embedded in Office documents and archives. PowerShell in HTA files or embedded in Office documents with macros. Multiple layers of embedded, so you take an executable, put it in a zip file, put it in a Word document. Lots of products can't unpack to that level. So for example, this is a PowerPoint presentation, and this is an executable embedded in it, right? So there's thousands of potential payloads. It's worth trying lots of different test cases to see what gets through and what doesn't. So in summary, external attackers can enumerate your policy. Policies are generally weak. No O-Day occurred. I haven't showed you any exploits, just a few tricks and techniques to trick users into executing arbitrary code. Encryption is the attacker's friend. So encrypted attachments, companies need to be able to send and receive these because it's part of their business processes to do so. And you've got a problem with embedded threats being detected. So lots of these solutions are not effectively doing deep content analysis and finding embedded threats embedded within Office documents and archives. So in terms of resources, there's quite a lot of resources that accompany this talk. I've actually written 2 white papers. So there's one currently on the Black Hat website, which I think is the email one I wrote about 6 weeks ago. I've recently written another white paper on web. So some of these things I've talked about, I've kind of skimmed very briefly. But the 2 white papers are about 30 pages each. So there's quite a lot of additional content in those. WebFeet, I'm going to be releasing the source code for that tool this week, and we're going to set up a demo site so that you can go and try it for yourselves. And Mailfeet, I'm probably going to release that next week, or maybe a little longer to finish that off. And that's it. Has anybody got any questions? Go ahead. Yeah, so of the Fortune 500, when I did those tests, so I started off with 153 domains which responded with a message coming back to me. And after 2 emails, 1 of them stopped responding. The other thing I found with web is that if you keep using the same payloads over and over again, so I was testing a McAfee product. After a couple of weeks, it started blocking some of the payloads. So if you were doing this from audit purposes, you need to kind of refresh your payload. So I started working on a tool to automatically embed executables and scripts in various different documents to regenerate the payload set so that you're taking a fresh look at it each time. But it's not a great deal that are reactively blocking. Any other questions?
So if you were running a proxy, would you turn on HTTPS inspection?
It's a problem, isn't it? Because, so I was talking to one of the vendors, or a couple of vendors yesterday. There is a solution to this if you don't want to inspect banking traffic or other types of categories, for example. So when I was talking to, I think it was WebSense, so I asked him specifically this question. What do you do if you want to do traffic inspection, but you don't want to do it for sensitive sites? And the way that they can do it is basically they have URL categories for filtering, but you can also apply those categories to inspection. So you can say for these sites, banking, government, other finance apps, confidential apps, don't do SSL inspection, and for the rest of sites, do SSL inspection. So there are solutions to this if you investigate how it can be done. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.